Welcome to the screencast Weaving Ideas Together, Flow and Coherence in Your Writing. This is a graduate writing workshop from the University of Saskatchewan, and my name is Heather McQuinney. I'm Graduate Writing Help Specialist at the University. This screencast is an abridged version of a PowerPoint presentation on flow and coherence, which you can find on the Student Learning Services website. I'd first like to go over the learning outcomes for this presentation. By the end of it, you should be able to recognize the strategies that good writers use to create flow and coherence, and then use these strategies to increase flow, coherence, and readability in your own writing. Well, what are we going to do in this screencast? First, we'll define flow and coherence. Then we'll discuss three key strategies: repetition, the old new information pattern, which I'll explain later, and signal or linking words. Finally, we'll focus on combining these strategies to enhance flow and coherence. Well, how can we define flow and coherence? Flow is the way words in a sentence connect to those that follow. So flow is very much about the linking of sentences and paragraphs, whereas coherence is more concerned with the overall organization of ideas in a piece of writing. But if you get the flow right, very often coherence will follow, especially if you've organized your ideas in a logical fashion. So for this reason, the presentation is going to focus on flow. So strategy 1, repetition, repeating key words and forms of words. I'm going to read this paragraph aloud, and I want you to listen for repeated words. Research has shown that caffeine reduces sleepiness and can lead to better academic performance. Despite its effectiveness in counteracting sleepiness, caffeine can have a negative impact on subsequent sleep, which for many students may already be compromised. Specifically, caffeinated beverages consumed near bedtime can prolong sleep onset and reduce sleep efficiency and depth, thus affecting both sleep quality and duration. Well, I've actually gone ahead and bolded the words, the key words, the repeated words, and I don't know whether you noticed how many were actually repeated, how much repetition there was in this paragraph. So let's take a look at some of these words. We have caffeine in the first line, repeated in the third line, and then as an adjective in the fourth line. We have sleepiness in the first line, and again in the second, and then the noun sleep in the third, and then the adjective sleep 3 times in the last 2 lines. So as I said, a lot of repetition. Well, why? Why would a writer have all this repetition? Well, it's to focus the reader's attention on the main ideas of the passage. So good writers don't necessarily reach for synonyms, because they know that repeating the same word or forms of the word, the words that are important, can really help focus the reader's attention, and that's what you want to do. You want to help your reader understand your passage, understand your paper. Well, the second strategy is the old new information pattern. Let's define it. This pattern is a method for organizing sentences and paragraphs, and it involves placing old information or information that the reader already has some familiarity with because the writer has already mentioned it at the beginning of the sentence before the main verb, and then placing new information after the verb. So if you use this method, the flow of ideas actually resembles links in a chain. And as the writer, you want to try not to break those links. The best way to understand the old new information pattern is to see it at work. So let's take a look at this very short abbreviated passage, the operation of nuclear power plant. I've colored the old information in red, the verbs in green, and the new information in blue. So let's look at the first sentence here. We start with a nuclear power plant. Now that information is considered to be old. Why? Because the reader has already come across the idea in the title. So it was already known to the reader, and so we are going to call this old information. And then we have our main verb and our new information after the main verb. The second sentence begins with the reactor. Now this too is considered old information because it isn't the first time the reader has heard about it. This idea was introduced in the previous sentence, a nuclear reactor. Now it's old information because it's the second time the reader is hearing about it. Then we have our verb, consists, and then we have new information. And the last sentence begins with the fuel rods. This information is old because it's picked up from the previous sentence where fuel rods were introduced. And then we have our verb and new information. So you can see then this is how the old new information works. It's a way of linking sentences and improving flow. Now I'm going to read two passages to you, and I'd like you to consider which is easier to read and why. There are actually two versions of the same passage, starting with version 1. Some astonishing questions about the nature of the universe have been raised by scientists exploring the nature of black holes in space. The collapse of a dead star into a point perhaps no larger than a marble creates a black hole. And version 2. Some astonishing questions about the nature of the universe have been raised by scientists exploring the nature of black holes in space. A black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star into a point perhaps no larger than a marble. Well, you probably said that version 2 is easier to read. And did you figure out why? Of course, it's because the old new information pattern is used. Let's see how it works here. We have black holes introduced here in sentence 1, and then immediately sentence 2 starts with the same idea, a black hole. And that black hole is mentioned before the main verb is created. So immediately we have flow between these two sentences. We have a link. And let's look at the first one, which was harder to read. Why is it harder to read? Of course, the old new information pattern isn't used. Of course, there is old information, black hole, here at the end of the second sentence, but it's too late to be really considered to really be considered old information. It should have been before the main verb, which is creates here. And so by putting it here at the end of the sentence, the writer has broken the link between the two sentences, which makes the short passage difficult to read. Well, there's one very good method for using the old new pattern, and it's called this or these plus noun. And the idea is that you start a new sentence with this or these plus a noun that describes the idea that you just expressed in the previous sentence. And this phrase, this or these plus noun, should come before the second sentence's main verb. Let's see how it works. These are two examples. Wilson found that short bursts of intense exercise showed more benefits than longer but less intense workouts. This finding is consistent with those of other researchers. So you can see that this finding, this plus noun, finding picks up on the idea that Wilson found in the previous sentence. And in the other example, most election models assume a rational voter who makes well-informed decisions. Since the election of Donald Trump, this view has been severely challenged. Again, we have this here, and we have view picking up the assumption of the election models. And so notice here we have a clause in front of the old information. And actually, it's all right to have a clause in front of the old information as long as the old information comes before the main verb in the sentence. Of course, in this case, it has been challenged. But you want to avoid starting a sentence with this or these alone, because that can confuse the reader and destroy flow. Take a look at how the flow isn't working in the first sentence. When chicken embryos die during incubation, hatchery producers suffer economic losses. This occurs for two reasons. So here there's ambiguity, isn't there? Because we don't know what the this refers to. So this is actually a student example, and this is how she corrected it. When chicken embryos die during incubation, hatchery producers suffer economic losses. These losses occur for two reasons. So now the readers, no doubt, we know what is being referred to in the second sentence. I'm going to move on to the third strategy now, using signal words strategically. So what are signal words and phrases? They are expressions used by the writer to guide the reader through a paper. The examples are first, second, and third, additionally, but, however, although, and conversely, and there are many others. So think of these signal words and phrases as signposts that convey information about logical connections, relationships, and order of ideas. But there are problems with signal words, and one of these is omitting them. So let's have a look at these examples, the same passage in two different versions. Traditional knowledge is recognized by scientists as a valuable tool in environmental assessments. Not all officials use traditional knowledge when conducting assessments. Well, here you can see there is no link between the first and the second sentence. One reason why there's no link is because the old information from the previous sentence, traditional knowledge and assessments, this old information is after the verb, after the main verb used, not before. And so there's no link between these two sentences. But let's look at the second one here. Traditional knowledge is recognized by scientists as a valuable tool in environmental assessment. However, not all officials use traditional knowledge when conducting assessments. You can see that the flow is much better here because the reader has used a signal word to signify, in this case, that he or she is moving to a contrasting idea. And particularly when you cannot or use the old new information pattern, or you don't choose to use it. This is when you should be using, especially when you should be using signal words to indicate to the reader that you are making some signal to the reader about perhaps a change in idea, a change in direction, or something that you want to signify. Another problem with signal words is that often they are overused. So let's take a look in this short partial passage. In addition, the world's increasing population requires more land to grow more food. Consequently, pressure on non-human species is increasing because their habitat is being cultivated for crops. Therefore, technological advancement to increase yields on existing lands is vital to avoid encroaching further onto animal habitat. However, boosting crop yields requires pesticides and genetically modified seeds. Well, you can see here that there are 4 signal words used, and that is too many for a short passage. How many you choose to use, it really depends on your sense. It depends on what you're trying to convey. But generally speaking, I'd say 2 in a short passage like this would be plenty. And generally speaking, your main method to create flow should be the old new pattern. Use signal words when you can't use the old new pattern, or when using them enhances the old new pattern. So one very good strategy is combining signal words with the old new pattern, particularly when you're pivoting to a new idea, and particularly when you're starting a new paragraph. Let's have a look at how this might work. So if you've got something like as a result, join it to this or these plus noun. So in an example here, you would have as a result of this ruling, and then you'd add some information to the end of the sentence. And so here what you're doing is you're you're indicating a relationship, cause and effect relationship with your signal phrase, and then you're hearkening back to what you were just talking about, this ruling. And then you'll add new information in order to pivot to a new idea. So this would be a good way to start a paragraph. Here's another example. Because of this or these plus noun. So you might start a paragraph, because of these recent developments, assuming you've just been talking about recent developments in the last paragraph, and then you'd introduce the topic of the new paragraph. Then you could, another example, notwithstanding this or these plus noun. Notwithstanding is your signal word plus this change, your what you were referring to in your previous paragraph or even your previous sentence, and then the new information at the end. And here's another example. In contrast to plus noun, so you could say something like, in contrast to Jones's findings, if you've just been talking about Jones's findings, and now you're going to pivot to talking about somebody, another researcher's findings, then this is how you might do that. So combining signal words with the old new pattern is a very good way of starting paragraphs, and it can also be used to pivot to an idea within paragraphs. We're going to finish by evaluating the flow in this short abridged passage, student passage. I'll read it aloud. Freshwater ecosystems can only be sustained through stakeholder participation. In recent years, stakeholders have tried different techniques to improve the quality of fresh water. These stakeholder efforts have led to novel solutions that may halt the degradation of fresh water. When stakeholders collaborate to solve a problem, they typically see it from a broader perspective and are motivated to work with others to find solutions. In addition to stakeholder engagement, interdisciplinary research is also critical to the search for solutions that sustain freshwater resources. Okay, so let's have a look at the flow. First of all, repetition. Did you notice any repetition? Well, I think there's quite a bit of repetition in here. We have fresh water here, and then here in the third line, and again here in the fourth line, and then we also refer to it in the second line of the second paragraph. Other words that are repeated, stakeholders repeated several times in the first paragraph. And how about the old new information pattern? Is it used? Well, it is used. You probably noticed here that the second sentence starts with stakeholders right after the phrase in the subject position coming from the previous sentence. And then the next sentence starts with these stakeholder efforts, referring to the techniques that were mentioned in the previous sentence. And then again, stakeholders are referred to in the final sentence of the paragraph. In fact, it starts with the idea of stakeholders, so it starts with the old information. So we can see working very well the old new pattern. And notice that in the little bit of the second paragraph that is included here, that we have a signal phrase in addition to, plus the old information, stakeholder engagement, referring to the last paragraph, the subject of the last paragraph, and then we have a new information here, interdisciplinary research, which will be the topic of this next paragraph. So we can see the combination of strategies used just here at the beginning of this second paragraph. So I'd like to sum up what we've done today. We've learned really three main strategies. The idea of repeating keywords and forms of words to focus your reader's attention, to use the old new information to create links between sentences. This should be your main strategy. And then using signal words strategically to guide your reader. Finally, combining strategies, using a signal word with the old new information pattern to improve flow and coherence. And I just want to remind you that the PowerPoint presentation that corresponds to the screencast is a longer version and has more models. Thank you.